Hey, how we doing, everyone? Welcome back. So today we're going to be discussing quite an interesting topic, but one that isn't really discussed all that often, and that is kind of like the risks that are involved when buying old motorcycles. Now, there's a lot of old bikes out there from the early to mid 90s, late 80s, even some that are earlier than that are going for really cheap, and they might seem like quite a good little purchase if you're looking to get involved in motorcycles on the cheap. Then they're a really good way to go, and that's kind of the direction that I kind of want to go in future. Is well, I plan to try and do a little bit of a trading up series, and well, the first bike I'm going to be buying is probably going to be scraping the barrel kind of bike to try and get myself the biggest profit when we actually come to sell it. But the issue with old bikes is that as much as they're a good option for a lot of people out there, because I mean, let's be honest here, we're going through a cost of living crisis, and if you're thinking about getting involved in motorcycles right now, it's probably not the best time, or at least one of the hardest times to get involved, just because one, I mean, a motorcycle might not be expensive depending on what you buy, but it's another burden on your finances for one. But also when you consider the cost of insurance, if you're a newer rider, that can be just astronomical. And so right now it's getting harder and harder to get involved in motorcycles until people can have a little bit more disposable income again like we used to. Then, well, motorcycle sales are probably going to be going down, and I think that is a quite a common trend these days, is that younger people just aren't as interested in bikes as people used to be. I think my generation is probably the last generation of people who had a real interest in motorcycles and actually had the ability to buy a motorcycle on a very limited budget because expenses weren't that high. And so when you think about it that way, someone in, I don't know, the mid 2000s who probably could have afforded to buy something a little bit more expensive, well, these days now they're looking at something that might be half the price, two-thirds the price, something that is cheaper. And when you're already looking kind of bottom of the barrel, I don't know, like less than £2,000, £2,000 here in the UK, maybe €2,500, $2,500, something like that, well, your options are going to be fairly limited already. But so you buy one of these bikes and you might seem really happy with it at first. I mean, RZX9R is a perfect example. Man, what a bike. We paid £1,500 for it. I've invested another, I don't know, 50 quid replacing the clutch and the springs. And yeah, wow, just an absolutely fantastic motorcycle. Hasn't put a foot wrong. It is due to go through its MOT, I think, in the next month or two, something like that. So that'll be interesting as well, especially because I know that I'm probably going to have to fix the lights. I might try and put it in anyway and just see if they accept it, because the lights, they flash quite quickly because they're LEDs on the rear as opposed to on the front where they've got the halogen bulbs, I think. And yeah, so I think it's like a process of putting in like a resistor or something like that in between the light circuit. So hopefully it's quite a simple process, but I might just put it in and see if the MOT tester has a problem with it. But that's a story for another day. But yeah, just what a bike. And those are motorcycles that you can find right now. There are loads. If you have a look on Facebook Marketplace, on eBay, I mean, eBay's not the best place to look for an old bike, but eBay is an option, or Gumtree, or Craigslist if you're in the United States or Canada. Places like that, you can find some killer deals on bikes that have got plenty of life left. And I mean, if you can find a motorcycle that's got less than 40,000 miles or so, is probably between, I don't know, less than 25 years old, then you're probably going to get yourself quite a good deal on a bike. It will probably need work. It will need some probably some clean carburetors if it hasn't been done already. Maybe some new fork seals, the brakes, brake fluid, oil changes, the regular kind of maintenance that old bikes tend to. When previous owners, they kind of tend to neglect old bikes because they're old and they don't really care as much about them. But if you care about your bike, then that's probably going to be some of the first things that you do, is going to be checking all those things, the coolant as well. And you're probably going to be changing all that. But the fact is that these bikes are out there. The issue is that if something goes wrong with one of these bikes, even though they might be quite straightforward to fix, and you can probably fix it yourself, let's be honest here. I mean, old motorcycles from like the 90s, early 2000s, before they became fuel injected, were quite simple machines in a lot of ways, and accessibility to everything is not an issue on a lot of old bikes. And I think that's why mechanics prefer working on older bikes, because things aren't as difficult to get to. That's not, of course, that doesn't apply to every motorcycle, of course, but for the vast majority of bikes that are out there from the 90s or so, they're pretty simple things to work on, especially if you look at Japanese motorcycles. Anyway, I can't really speak for European bikes. I'm not much of a European bike guy. I do want to get more into European bikes, but and cruisers, of course. But yeah, it's one of those things where you're going to struggle finding parts for it. So I had a message from someone recently asking about, I have a ZX9, where can I get a new cylinder head from? I'm like, mate, first of all, how did a cylinder head break? I suppose it was probably knocking or something like that, and it just blew through a valve, maybe cracked the head. Who knows? Maybe it was running too lean. Whatever. A load of things could have caused that problem, but a cylinder head's quite a chunky piece of metal, so it's surprising. Or maybe it's warped from overheating, something like that. But I was thinking to myself, mate, I don't know, to be honest with you, because there's no such thing as breaking yards anymore, or junk yards where you can go and find an old motorcycle that's the same model as yours and start just picking bits off of it. They don't exist anymore. At least here in the UK, they don't. Maybe if you live in the United States, I don't know. Maybe they're still around, but no such thing as breaking yards here in the UK. The ones that used to be around aren't around anymore, and even for cars as well. There's only a few breaker yards for cars here in the UK. Maybe one or two are left, probably because there's no money in it. But that's going to be your number one biggest problem, is trying to find spare parts. And the issue that you find yourself doing is that if it's either you or a mechanic, well, a mechanic is going to be like, right, try and find a spare this. And you'll be like, well, there aren't any of those left. So you either have to look for new old stock, if it's gaskets and things, new old stock. But if it's actual parts, you're probably not going to have any luck. So you go back to your mechanic and you'll be like, look, I can't find any of this stuff. It's not anywhere. You can't find it. The manufacturers don't make it anymore. The aftermarket doesn't make it anymore. So your mechanic's going to be like, right, okay, I might be able to do something. And so it ends up being basically a botch job. They'll try welding, they'll try machining, they'll try something else to try and get it working. But you know in your heart of hearts that it's not going to last as long from that fix, all right? It's just like a patch. It's just to keep it running for a little bit longer. Some people would be like, well, okay, if I can get the bike running a little bit longer, then I'll try selling it onto the next poor sod and it'll be their problem. Maybe, who knows? But it might not even be possible. I mean, if it's something like a cylinder head, I mean, you'll have to go to a machine shop and get like a block of aluminium and get it all like lathed or whatever they call it. I'm not a machinist, so I don't know, but you know what I mean? You have to get it made specifically for the bike. Maybe like 3D printing might be an option these days for something like that. I don't know. It's just something to consider. Maybe going forward into the future, where maybe we can print with metals like aluminium. Aluminium's a softer metal than iron, so it couldn't be a cruiser or at least an old bike. But maybe aluminium might be a choice for printing in future. Who knows? Maybe that's an option. But for the most part, you're going to really struggle to find these parts. And even things like gaskets. If you can't find an old gasket, I was quite lucky with the ZX9 because it had its clutch issue. I looked for a gasket and I was able to find one. It was just a paper gasket. It wasn't anything special, but I was able to find one because they're quite easy and cheap to make. So I suppose the aftermarket can still make a little bit of a buck on them, but that's the problem. As these bikes kind of get phased out because there aren't as many of them as there were before, well, there's less market for the aftermarket, if you know what I mean. There's less people that are interested in buying stuff for bikes like the ZX9, you know, bikes like Yamaha Thunder Race or a 929 Fireblade, whatever the case might be. It's just as these bikes get older and as they get phased out, as they start breaking down and people get rid of them, well, the aftermarket will have no customers to sell their products to. So it becomes one of those things where, okay, you got to try and find bodge fixes. And I've seen it as well a few times where people have used like a gasket sealer. So it's a little bit like silicone, where you know what I mean, where you seal like, I don't know, bathrooms or something like that. It's like a goop that you basically pour around the area where the gasket would normally be, and then you mount the piece of metal together. I've seen people do that. They don't tend to last all that well. They might last a year, 2 years, but as it goes through heating cycles, it's just not going to be as good as a proper gasket. So that's one of the biggest issues that you're going to find with older bikes. So they might seem quite tempting to begin with, especially if you've got a little bit of cash and you're looking to get involved in bikes. Don't look at bottom of the barrel bargain bucket motorcycles, all right? Look at something a little bit more premium. Doesn't have to be much more. 500, £1,000 more than something like my ZX9, and you'll probably find something that is much better, much newer, and has a lot more life left in it, and you don't have to worry about if something goes wrong that you're not going to be able to find the parts to replace them. So, and I think with certain motorcycles, especially towards the late 90s, early 2000s, they have a lot of parts that are interchangeable as well between newer bikes and the older ones. I mean, for example, the Ninja 650, so that's my first big motorcycle, was the ER6. The Ninja 650 and the ER6 are exactly the same motorcycle. I don't think there's that much difference between them. So you could probably find a part that is for a Ninja 650, and if you're riding an ER6 from mid-2000s, early 2000s, then you'll probably be able to find a part that will fit from the Ninja 650. So again, you can kind of be a little bit more savvy when it comes to the motorcycle they actually buy. But again, you're taking a bit of a gamble, especially when you get to an even older motorcycle. I've been tempted before by bikes like a Kawasaki GPZ 900. I think that'll be a fantastic motorcycle, a great experience to have as one of like the OG 900cc flagship sport bikes from back in the day. I think that'll be an awesome experience, especially because it was featured in Top Gun. I'd love to have a go on one, but as much as I would love to buy one, and I have seen a few out there actually, I don't know if I'll ever be able to pull the trigger unless it is for the channel. So it would be like a little experiment. It would be for a bit of fun. It wouldn't be something that I would be riding daily, you know. Whereas most of you lot who are probably watching this, that's the job, that's the role that the motorcycle will probably have. Is going to be either a daily rider or at least a weekend rider, something that is going to be reliable for those trips that you have, those longer journeys, those tours, whatever you intend to do with your bike. You want it to be reliable. And something like a bike from the 80s probably can't do that for you, or if it does, it probably won't last for very long. I have all the confidence in the world that my ZX9 could probably do a trip to Scotland and back, and I'm actually considering doing that on the ZX9 soon. It might be one of the last videos that we shoot on that bike because I'm due to sell it May, June time this year. So I don't know. We'll see on that front. But I do plan to do a really long trip with the ZX9, especially after all the punishment that we've been putting it through, doing the burnouts, doing the wheelies. And I do have another video planned which might kill it. We'll see. I don't want to give it away, but it might kill it. I hope it doesn't, because it's got a really strong engine, but there is that possibility. And just to prove that this bike, despite the fact that I wouldn't have treated it all that well throughout my ownership, I have looked after it to be fair, but not treated it as well as my other bikes, that it can still do those long trips. Believe it or not, I've never been to Scotland before either, so again, it would be a huge adventure, and yeah, I've been wanting to do it for a long time, and I think the ZX9 is the perfect candidate for that trip. But just one last hurrah for this old, amazing bike. And I think that's kind of like the charm behind older motorcycles, is the fact that they're old, they're beaten up, they haven't been treated all that well, and then you've taken it and you've looked after it, and it's showing you a little bit of love back. It's showing you that they can keep going just that little bit longer. They have got life left, that you can still have fun, you can still enjoy them, and they'll still be reliable for you as well. Just I think for me that's one of the biggest attractions behind older bikes, is just giving them a new lease of life, and they will thank you for it. They will reward you for it more often than not. But unfortunately, too many people, they just get an old bike or an old car and they just beat it up until it dies. They don't do any oil changes, nothing, no maintenance. They just and then they're like, oh, okay, it's dead, I'll buy another cheap one. But if you look after it a little bit, even if you treat it poorly, if you look after it, do those oil changes, do that brake fluid, give it the lube, do the chain, all right? You okay, bud? I think the dog was choking on a treat that he had. You okay? I think he's okay. Gosh, that worried me a little bit. He just started going like like as he was about to be sick. If any of you have a dog, and you'll know what I'm talking about when it sounds like they're trying to be sick. Well, that's exactly what just happened there, but he seems all right. He managed to swallow it. But yeah, anyway, where were we? Just the fact that these old bikes have so much more to prove. It's like they want to prove to you that they can still do what you intend them to do, or what they were intended to do, even despite the fact that how old they are. They're 20, 25 years old, and they can still do it just as good as they used to. And to be fair as well, in terms of like performance and things like that, they're not that far behind the modern stuff. Seriously, my ZX9 isn't that far behind a ZX10 in a lot of ways. Yeah, okay, it's down on horsepower, still matches it for torque, doesn't have as high a rev ceiling, but doesn't have as high a top speed either. But for street use, quarter mile is like less than 11 seconds, something like that, which is crazy, considering that these days a ZX10R can probably do a quarter mile in under 10 seconds. But it's not that far off, honestly. They're more powerful than a 600, even the new 600s. They're more powerful than a 600. They can go faster than a 600. They've got more torque than a 600. So these 900cc bikes in the 90s, honestly, are still some of the best bang for buck buys that you can get in terms of performance. So they're a no-brainer for me in a lot of ways. If you can find a good one and you know it's a good one, follow our guides on how to find a good motorcycle. We've got a couple. We've got one on the Wifey's Ninja 125, and we've got one on my ZX9 as well. Go check them out, because I run through all the things that I look for on a motorcycle. And if all of it checks out, I'm probably going to take it, unless it's overly priced or something like that. I'm probably going to take it. But yeah, you'll know if you know what to look for on an old bike. You'll be totally confident in its abilities, and as long as you know that it's probably going to need an oil change, or the first thing you should do with an old bike is do an oil change anyway, regardless, because you don't know when the last one was done. My ZX9 doesn't have a service book anymore. So who knows when the last service was done, and the previous owner did say to me when I bought it that it needs an oil change. So that's the first thing I did. But that's good practice anyway. When you buy an old bike, first thing you do is oil change, brake fluid. Well, at least check the brake fluid anyway, make sure it's got enough in there. And make sure it's not like a really dark brown color or something like that. Make sure it's nice and yellow, that it's translucent. That nice fresh .4 color, or .3 even if it's that old. But yeah, honestly, I want to encourage all of you to have a look at old bikes, because they do still have a lot to offer, and if you can give it a new lease on life, then they will reward you for it. So I don't want to discourage anyone from getting an old bike, but I would recommend that you've had a little bit of experience with mechanics in some respect, working on the bikes yourselves and understanding what the bike should be like compared to what it is. Because too many people, they buy a motorcycle, and because they don't actually know what they're looking at, they think it's running absolutely fine, and it's not. It's running on one cylinder or two cylinders or whatever the case might be. Just little stupid things like that a normal person wouldn't necessarily know. If you're not that mechanically minded, and bearing in mind I'm not that mechanically minded either, you don't need to know a lot to know when you're buying something good, but just a little bit of know-how will help you so much when it comes to buying these old bikes. So do as much research as possible, not just on like the mechanical side, but also do research on the bike itself, the specific motorcycle, the specific year, the specific model that you are looking to buy. Google common issues with that motorcycle, and you'll get forums with loads and loads of suggestions of things to look out for, and you'll get a much better picture of what you're buying. And if you can do all that, then you'll be okay. If you're not prepared to do that, then look for something a little bit newer. Look for something that is a little bit more expensive, something that you probably don't have to worry about as much. But that's kind of like what I'd recommend, and that's just being totally honest about the risks involved when buying an old motorcycle, because they can look really enticing, but if you don't know what you're buying, then that's when it can cost you an absolute fortune, or at least you'll just be selling it for scrap. And I don't even know how much a motorcycle is valued at for scrap these days. It's probably like 100 quid or something like that. Who knows? But a car's like 400 or 500 quid, depending on how big it is. But for a bike, there's not exactly as much metal involved in the construction of a motorcycle, so junk value, there's probably not a lot there. But yeah, imagine you're paying £1,000 or £1,500, $2,000, something like that on this old bike, and then it breaks down on you within a week, and you can't fix it. Well, you just wasted 1,500 quid. And if you're looking at budget motorcycles, then that's probably all the money you had for the bike. You know what I mean? And so you have to make sure when you're on a budget, you have to do as much research as possible. Look over the bike with a fine-tooth comb. Do as much research as possible, not just on our channel. Look at other channels as well, and get yourself this really broad picture of what you need to look out for when you're buying an old bike, and you should be fine. But I hope that this video has been informative for you, especially if you are looking to buy a motorcycle in the near future. I mean, we're coming into spring now, so there can be lots of motorcycles coming out for sale, and now's the time to buy a motorcycle, to be honest with you, because we're just transitioning from winter to spring in the next month, so we're probably going to find some pretty good deals on some bikes. But yeah, just be aware, take this information on board, and yeah, you shouldn't have any problems. But let me know down in the comment section below if you've had some issues in the past with an old motorcycle that you've bought, if you thought it was solid, and yeah, like I say, a week later, a month later, it broke down and it wasn't solid. Well, let me know your experiences down below in the comment section. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And because I've bought a few older bikes now, and both the experiences for me have been, or every experience rather for me, has been really positive. The main ones are the ZX9 and the CBR 600RR. So the CBR was 2003 and the ZX9 was 1999. So both really old bikes by today's kind of standards, but both absolutely fantastic and brilliant buys. So you can get those kinds of bikes, the ones that will really do you proud. You just got to know what you're looking for. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this one. If this video has helped you out, leave that like button, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell as well so you don't miss any of our future content on the ZX9, on the ZH2, and on the ZR 1400, and of course, not to mention the Wifey's Ninja 125. And yeah, we will catch you all in the next video, everyone. Take care, ride safe.